Welcome to Stories with Murph. We'll be reading Brother to a Dragonfly over these next few weeks, written by Will Campbell. Will Campbell is sort of a hero in Progressive Baptists. I say sort of a hero. He is a hero. He's one of my personal heroes because in the time of civil rights, he was a white pastor on the side of black people's voting rights and justice. He strived to make the world better for everyone. So he was the chaplain for Ole Miss from 1954 to 1956 until numerous death threats caused him to move to the National Committee of Churches, where he was a field officer. And while he was a field officer, I'm going to pick this up, National Council of Churches, I should say. Apologize. I'm going to pick this up. This is from Wikipedia. In 1957, working for the National Council of Churches, Campbell participated in two notable events of the Civil Rights Movement. He was one of four people who escorted the black students who integrated the Little Rock, Arkansas public schools. And he was the only white person present at the founding of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, by Martin Luther King. Continuing on, he helped freedom riders of the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, to integrate interstate bus travel despite white mob violence in Alabama. He risked himself for the belief that people shouldn't just be treated equally, but treated well. He was for dignity when the culture around him suggested that dignity was reserved for only one race. I believe that he should be remembered not just for who he was then, but what he can teach us now. So it is my pleasure to begin Brother to a Dragonfly by Will Campbell. So far as Joe and I knew, this is how it began. Two lived just down the road. The other two lived in a house several miles away we called across the river. These four and more, for they too had their history. But these were our history, and we didn't bother much with theirs. Grandpa Bunt never raised his voice, lost his temper, lost a fight. Some thought he had neither of the latter, but he did. Because even Uncle Bunt, everybody called him Uncle, was a sinner. Have chairs, he said to his guests on the day of his death, and then insisted that his baby son not leave him. His baby son was our daddy, and he came home crying, because Grandpa said at sunset, "You have gone as far as you can go." And Daddy knew. knew that Grandpa was dying. And he did die, and slept with his fathers, but not before he made 71 crops and progeny plenty, 10 to be exact, 3 of whom died 10 days apart with bleeding flux, leaving them childless. But the new dispensation brought 7 more, not counting another dead in the womb. And not before he divided his earth, giving each child enough for one last generation to survive on the land, and became a Baptist deacon, and prayed long, pretty prayers about stooping to drink from the bitter springs of life, and talked publicly with God about all the bad times and the good things promised. Grandma Betty, grunting every breath, sometimes twice, with neuralgia and lumbago, but smiling too, because her lover, for 66 years her lover, never once forgot to say, "Mighty fine supper, Miss Campbell," no matter what the fare. And once she cried when he asked if the bread, hon, was cooked yesterday or the day before, that being as close to irreconcilable differences as the years ever knew. And she talked about the glory hole, meaning the place just above the bridge where we were baptized, and where boys went bathing with her nod, but girls' bodies made it a naughty sacrilege. And Macomb City was the wickedest place in the world. Camphor balm from the Raleigh man and aspirin from the store were good from lumbago, but not as good as salt and mackerel and knickknacks Uncle Tiff brought from Louisiana. She sat on the pew that ran crosswise to the congregation, right up front with Miss Emma, Miss Lola, Miss Eula, Aunt Dottie, Aunt Ida, not one of them either Miss or Aunt, but old like Grandma was old, for old started at 30. And she wore the flannel bathrobe to church the very first Sunday after Christmas, because it was the prettiest thing she had ever seen, and the Lord deserved the best. And because it was 1933 and she didn't have a bathroom. Grandpa Will, opening the gate leading from the barn to the field of shriveled, crackling corn stalks, good only for fodder now, because the drought of 31 had made it so. I want the Lord's will to be done, and I know He knows what's best, but I can't figure out what He's got in mind. He called me Jack and gave me nickels, taught me how to chew tobacco, said I had worms, though I didn't skid along the floor. Let me turn the ice cream freezer and let me pick the first watermelon because I was his favorite. Because I, of 30-odd, bore his name. 17 stalks of Mississippi red sugar cane stuffed in the rollers of the syrup mill, snapping the pole that rolled the rollers, the pole pulled round and round by a pair of fine, fat Missouri mules. My God, boy, what's the hell's the matter with you? Not to me, but to Joe, who silently took both rap and rebuke. Nestled close together after Grandma died in a feather mattress, picked from his own geese and stuffed by him in the candy-striped ticking. The clock, carefully, slowly, wound up tight each night, goes off at 4. 2 feet, now old, hit the floor, followed by a crackling pine knot fire and 15 minutes of aged body bends and push-ups. Tallow is for tetter, that's foot disease. Whiskey is for coughs. Vic Salve is for kids, and Clara's the cook. And then Miss Daisy Sandifer came to Grandpa's house because, he said, old rats like cheese too. And I went home not understanding. Grandma Bertha. Long auburn tresses dropping into the sourdough and the tea cake batters like tongues of fire in reverse on Pentecost Day. And dark roasted coffee beans, parched each morning and ground by the first hint of day in a cast iron grinder. Be kind to the lilies. Lice don't make folks trash. They may be angels unaware. Some folks say I oughtn't to snuff dip. I don't care if he's a darky, and I don't care if he stole Albert Carroll's old truck. He's 14 years old, and they ain't going to beat him. Buried at Hebron at 59, the preacher said we ought to be thankful. 'Cause in New Orleans, death was ugly. Said 4 men had to hold the corners of the casket down with shovels to keep it from floating. Said God meant us to return to dust like at Hebron, and nobody ought to be buried in New Orleans. This was our history, Joe's and mine. Of course, we had a mother and father also, but they are not history. They are a part of now. Not many people today have grandparents, so they have antiques, anything older than 50 years, effigies of grandmas they never knew, symbols of grandpas they know mainly as Christmas cards, trying pathetically to create a history they do not have or believe they do not have. But Joe and I had a history, these 4. They lived their lives, each one straddled the horse and rode it to the ground, neither applying the spurs nor holding too tight a rein, remaining firmly in the saddle until the end approached, all like a Remington canvas, and each leaving even then with a certain hesitation, but without murmur or rustle of thought in opposition to either the roughness of the ride or the imminence of the finale. And then, 10 years ago, long after the last of these in our histories had gone, Joe died. Young, but unlike them, Joe was in some sort of a hurry. About midnight, he went into his room and locked the door. From then until 11 the next morning, the remnant of what had tried and wanted to be his world sought to break through to him. Then, when it failed, the hinges were removed and he was waiting for it. But waiting dead. Not only willingly, but hurriedly, early, without the hesitation of those who had gone before us. Somewhere, something went wrong. I do not know where the street began. I know where it ended. What were the intersections, junctions, and cloverleafs that merged into that one-way lane of traffic? Where were the yellow and red lights, the caution, detour, and dangerous curve signs, which, if seen and heeded, might have led to a different destination? I don't know. Do not ever expect to find out, and probably don't want to find out. Perhaps the light was always and only green, frozen, stuck there, never changing, and never offering the traveler warning of the pitfalls ahead. I do not know. Thank you guys for going through this prologue section and this first installment of Stories with Murph on 2 cameras. Hope to see you next time, and be cool.